Sometimes you ask yourself, when you watch news, you see some schools, some children still are sitting under trees. That in some schools, in this era of CDF, that some children are still doing exams in mud-walled houses, classrooms. Mr. Speaker, to me, it is a shame for us as leaders from that area. And I'm being very careful. I'm not saying member of parliament, because as a matter of fact, CDF is not supposed to be administered and managed by members of parliament as it is today. We therefore are speaking to the committees in those constituencies. Get your priorities right. There is no reason why you should start, there is this obsession with starting many secondary schools. Why should you start secondary school in an area where children are still learning under tree? Why do you buy buses? I see this craziness. People buying buses, CDF buying buses everywhere, left, right, and center. You are buying buses to give to students who are sitting on stones. I think to me, that is misplaced priority. So what in a nutshell I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleading to those committees, I'm not pleading to my colleagues here. You are no longer in charge of CDF. Even the courts affirmed the same. If you try to touch CDF, you will be in trouble. You will be jailed. So you are no longer in charge of CDF. Those committees which are in charge of CDFs should make sure that they prioritize the needs of those areas properly. As members of parliament, I still insist that the law we passed, giving ourselves the powers to oversight CDF, that must be implemented. Mr. Speaker, I say so because one of the reasons why CDF has succeeded more than any other fund is because these politicians are more accountable. Because even if you joke, after 5 years, by the way, we have seen people, and I will not name names, who had issues with managing CDF when it was in our hands, in their constituency. They are not here. Majority of them served one term, voted out. So if you also want to follow suit, then sit there and relax. Because CDF, even as the legal framework takes it away from you, perception of the members of the public is still you are in charge. And therefore, you need to oversight this money properly. And if we are going to oversight, that committee which we created, called Oversight Committee, I don't know how it died. Because I thought we were supposed to form a committee that would oversight this fund. Whoever is going to be the chair, and I hope Honorable Lasanet will not be the chair again of this committee. Whoever is going to be the chair, please be active enough to make this, the monitoring of this fund vibrant. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by saying that if there is any money that needs to be properly ring-fenced, it is CDF. But I don't want to conclude without mentioning something about the Senate and its oversighting role on this, the county funds. I think this time round, I want to plead with our brothers in the Senate to take their work even more seriously. Mr. Speaker, if it is lack of funds, which is making senators not perform this function of oversighting, and I'm speaking to you now, Mr. Speaker, as the chairman of the Parliamentary Service Commission, I think we need, as the House, during the budget-making process, to provide some money to the Senate, to have oversight role on these our counties. I'm telling you, whatever is happening in counties is a shame, and we cannot let it go the way it is. You cannot have a simple clerk who is earning less than 200,000 in a county building hotels in 2-3 years. And by the way, and they are very poor because, you know, most of them also didn't go to school even to learn business. They even build hotels in their homes in the rural areas where there are no customers. So you find someone putting up a serious hotel, a hotel that should be built either in Mombasa for domestic tourism, or even or built in Naivasha, or built in Nairobi. Someone has put a huge hotel in his home in Waondo, in Super North constituency. I'm not saying my brother here has put up one, but I'm just giving that example, that how on earth would you have a clerk working 8 hours in an office, not doing any business that you can see, and putting up a huge hotel here, putting up another one, putting up houses for 3 wives. Immediately they got these jobs. They married 2 more wives, and then they are concubines. So, and then vehicles, a fleet of them. And you know, you look at them, you ask yourself, are these people serious? That is why most of these governors, Mr. Speaker, if you noticed, they struggled to win their 2nd term. And I'm telling you, if they were going for a 3rd term, unfortunately, we had put maximum is 2 terms. Now, I just pray that this, their 2nd term, they don't do more damage, because now they are not going to seek re-election. I don't know, maybe God will protect us. But before God comes in, Auditor General, Ethics and Anti-Corruption, please save us from this wanton theft of public funds. Finally, the national government, I don't want to talk much because I know I cannot talk to a government that is still not clearly in place. But the government will be in place. You know, even if you say, yeah, now, even those who believe, Mr. Speaker, even those who believe that President was sworn in, still know there is no cabinet. There will be a cabinet soon. So those of us who don't expect cabinet, we know there is no president that has been sworn in. In fact, we are soon expecting another very serious swearing in, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to make my contribution to this motion on the appointments to committees of the National Government Constituency Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, I want to first start by thanking the members of the committees of these constituencies, the selection committees, which came up with these names so that we can have all the constituencies. I know a number of constituencies had been approved, I think well over 170, and now we have additional ones. But I want to, before going to the details of these appointments, I want to talk about the National Government Constituency Development Fund and its impact on the development of this country. It is my pleasure also to recognize, because I was worried at one point that CDF, as we used to know it, was almost dying when this matter was still in court. But I thank God that the court so sense that the objective of the National Government Constituency Development Fund is still relevant. It is still relevant because we still have national government functions which are being performed even with devolution. Devolution has just devolved some functions, but has left some functions at the national level. And we still need, and it is still relevant, very relevant, to have specific approach and targeted funding of those national government functions like education, like security, among others. And when the courts did rule that this concept of CDF is not unconstitutional, but probably we needed to make amendments to streamline it with the Constitution, I said, I think I agree with the judiciary completely. Mr. Speaker, looking at the transformation that CDF has brought to the grassroots development in this country, I think no one in his right or her right senses would dispute that CDF has made a contribution, and a positive contribution. Those of us who are keen to remember the pre-CDF period and the post-CDF period, even if you do not like the fund, you will agree that this fund has made a contribution in this country. I also know that there are a number of instances and areas where this fund has been misappropriated, just like any other fund in this country. And those areas of misappropriation, we want to talk to the institutions like the Office of the Auditor General, like Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, to ensure that funds that are appropriated by this House and voted to go and implement specific programs at the grassroots level really actually reach the grassroots. The problem is not just with the CDF as it is, the problem is even more with county funds. We would want to see the billions of shillings that are being devolved to the counties. And I hope that we are even going to devolve more to the counties to spur economic growth. But as we do that, we want to ask the management of these funds at the grassroots level, at the county levels, to be alive to the fact that these funds are being allocated to help inspire economic growth at the grassroots level, not to line the pockets of a few individuals who are privileged to be in a position to access these funds. Mr. Speaker, the reason why at times we fight so hard to have national government leadership is because of this perception that when you get to national government leadership, that you will access resources that probably we would otherwise not access if your party or your president of choice or your candidate of choice is in power. If we devolve properly, if we devolve not just at the county level, but we devolve even the national government funds, the national government functions, if we devolve them properly with the resources following these programs, so that every region feels properly catered for, that resources are being received at the counties, at the constituencies, regardless of who is in power, then the focus will shift from the asking or wanting a person from your place or your party to be the president. We will now be more objective, and we'll start thinking of who is he or she. If we vote to be the president of this country and the deputy president, we would bake a bigger cake for this country. We will not now be talking about sharing of the cake, but baking of a bigger cake. And then we will now be more objective even in our decisions, so that we avoid this unnecessary antagonism. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask that let us not just think of devolving CDF in terms of percentages. Let us objectively calculate the functions that CDF is supposed to implement in our constituencies. If it is education, how much do we want to allocate for primary schools to improve the infrastructure? How much do we want to allocate to secondary schools to improve the infrastructure? How much do we want to put for our security? How much do we want to put for these functions, the specific functions that we want the CDF to help us implement? Then once we get the amount, we can now then budget and allocate that amount to the CDF to be shared to those constituencies. But just putting arbitrary amounts at times sounds very fuzzy, but you see, by the end of the day, it is all about implementation and service delivery to our people. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that if we utilize CDF properly, and I hope no one will take offense with this,